What you see here are the pieces to the Blacksmith forge. And these go in the Blacksmith workshop, and that is on the website. What I'm going to show you in this video is how to do the bed of coals that goes in the bottom of the forge. Now this forge was made using mold number 263, which is the rubble block mold. Now if you take a look at the bed here that we're going to put the coals on, you're going to notice something a little funny about it. You'll notice that we've got two little square holes, one on each side here. The reason that those two holes are there is that when we hump up plaster on top of this bed, I don't want plaster to hump up in these areas. And the reason I don't is because you'll notice on the inside of the arch here, there's a smaller arch, and you see the smaller arch sort of stops about there. And what's going to happen is when we put this bed of coals up underneath, the bed, those will fit right up where the bottom of that arch is. Here's how the whole forge fits together. Basically, the bed of coals goes in the bottom, like about there. The back of the forge, and by the way, here's what the back side looks like. The back of the forge sits against it like there. And then we have the top of the forge that sits on top like there. And so when you look around at the back side, you can also see a little bit of the flame down on the inside once we get this, once we get the bed of coals in and painted. If you're afraid to do this on your one piece, if you've got some scrap blocks you can glue together, try it on a little scrap area and see how you do with humping plaster up onto the area. Do this as a test before you do your actual piece. Okay, let's go ahead and mix up some plaster. We want to mix it up pretty thick here, and I've only got 1 ounce of water in this cup, so it's not going to take a lot of plaster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle this plaster into the water, and this is going to be way more plaster than I really need for this job. And we want to make it thick. We want to make it thick, kind of like whipped cream, kind of like stiff whipped cream. And I think we're going to need more than that. That 1 ounce of water, look at how much plaster this is making. This is probably going to be a lot more than I need. Okay. Okay, now it's starting to get thick. Okay. Now that's probably going to be about close to right. Okay, let's see if I can get this in the camera. See how this flows? See how it's kind of stiff? So here's my actual piece I want to hump up a little bit of plaster on to make my bed of coals. So first, we're going to saturate this. We're going to get this thing really, really soaking wet. Okay, there's water standing on it. In just a minute, this water will soak down in. Then I'm going to take a little bit of plaster that I'd mixed up. And I'm not going to use a lot here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it over the top here. Let's see if I can kind of get in close to the camera. I'm just going to make this go across the top. And I want to cover the whole area. I want to cover all the rock texture here. So let's bring it over top of the rocks. And I don't want it to go in those little holes that I've got. Okay? So there we go. It's going over top here. And it looks like, let me scoop up just a little bit more plaster so I can get the plaster up here on the top. Okay. Now slowly this plaster is going to firm up. Now there's not a lot of ridges, not a lot of texture on here yet. So I think what I'm going to do is just use the back of the spoon here, and I'm just going to kind of work this plaster over. And the longer it sets here, the thicker it gets. So I should be able to kind of get some sort of rough texture on here to just kind of hub things up a little bit here. Okay. So notice this plaster, this blocks that are underneath is soaking that water down in, and so it's making this plaster thicker and thicker and thicker. Okay. That looks pretty good. Now if you have any plaster going on the side, just sort of wipe it off with your finger. You don't want globs of plaster extending past, because that'll make it get in the way of where this thing sets into the bed. Now, next is to go ahead and sprinkle plaster on top. So I'm going to wipe my spoon off. And what I'm going to do is, this is still a little bit damp, so I'm going to get a little bit of plaster on my spoon, and I'm going to try to carefully sprinkle just a little bit of plaster on there. Okay, now I went a little nuts with it here. I didn't mean to get quite that much, but what we can do is kind of tap this around, and we're going to tap off some of the extra from the surface. Okay, now it looks like we've got You know, it's pretty pretty bumpy, pretty rough. That's pretty much exactly what we want there. I think that'll work real nice. To set this plaster, I'm going to go ahead and spray a little bit with a spray bottle. So what I'm going to do is just mist it lightly. And I want to mist it until, okay, that's looking a little bit shiny right there. So I'm starting to get worried. I don't want to go too much because I don't want to liquefy this. And keep in mind that if you spray too much and you liquefy the whole thing, you can just take something and scrape it all off and just start from scratch. I'm just going to spray this just a little bit more. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, so it's still a rough texture. Everything is saturated. It's going to set up. We're going to let this thing dry completely, and then we're going to go ahead and do the hot coal, make it look like hot coals.